This is the word of the Lord.
Well done. Marathon reading. I've got to tell you, next week's is longer. It's an entire chapter next week. We come to this season and we turn to John's Gospel to give us some special stories about Jesus as we go through Lent. And they're great stories, really good stories. Here we have a very awkward interaction. An unlikely offer is given by Jesus to this woman, and then a kind of uncomfortable disclosure happens. Just another day in the life-transforming ministry amongst the first century people of Palestine as Jesus moved amongst them. And this interaction focuses particularly on the notion of thirst. Thirst is a vital part of life, actually. In a similar way to hunger, thirst is the natural mechanism that reminds us that our bodies require something, in this case, hydration. In the ancient Near East, this area where Jesus was in his day, water was a serious matter of life and death. Rome certainly did build aqueducts that moved water from one place to another. They're quite famous. Some of them still exist today. But there was no highly developed system of underground pipes like the ones that we take for granted in our modern cities. Local access to water was absolutely vital for survival, and it also had a huge impact on one's quality of life. In the hot, dry conditions of that region, a ready and reliable supply of safe drinking water was absolutely essential. I think we're so well served with water in our cities that this is hard for us to imagine. Each morning I go walking out to Barangaroo and back, sometimes a bit further, and I often go, I go before the sun is hot, at this time of year before the sun is up. But there are sufficient working public water bubblers all the way out to that point and back that I don't need to carry a water bottle at all. I know where the reliable water sources are, and I plan my hydration stops along the way according to those opportunities. And as a result, I don't get thirsty. And I suspect most of you have never really been very, very thirsty. Perhaps you were unlucky enough to get caught out somewhere, and you've had the uncomfortable sensation of your throat being so dry that it feels like it might even crack. It becomes an effort to swallow due to the lack of moisture in your system. Not recommended. You are in trouble at that point. You get a sense of just how vulnerable we humans are to dehydration. So when Jesus appears to offer a source of refreshment and life that is always with a person and bubbles up from within them, that offer would be both of intense interest and perhaps a tad far-fetched. How does that possibly work? But of course, the idea of thirst has more than one meaning. In the Beatitudes, a few chapters earlier in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied." When we speak of thirst, it can mean the need of the body for hydration, and it can also mean the desire of the soul for that which deeply satisfies. And while the context here is obviously the former, I want to suggest that Jesus' meaning appears to be the latter. There are no indicators that Jesus wanted to turn any person into a perpetual water fountain as such. On the other hand, multitudes over the generations have discovered Jesus to be the fulfillment of their hopes and desires in a way that nothing else could. Which begs the question, what is it that you thirst for? Could it really be that Jesus is the fulfillment of your deepest desires? And the question regarding your thirst might not be as simple as you first assume. This dynamic is humorously illustrated in the movie Bedazzled. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It was originally made by Peter Cook and Dudley Moore back in 1967. Very clever script. It was remade in 2000 with Brendan Fraser and Elizabeth Hurley, and The précis of the story is basically the devil offers an unsuspecting victim 7 wishes in exchange for their soul. And the victim articulates what he wants, only to discover the bit that would really fulfill his deepest desire had not been specified, so it was not granted. So he gets all these things that he thought would make him happy, but it's missing one important bit, and it doesn't satisfy him, which really quite cleverly illustrates how complex we human beings are. Most often, our most profound desire is something that cannot be obtained by manipulation. It can only be freely given by another. The very act of controlling or determining it alters the essential meaning for us. Of course, I'm referring to that deepest need of all, of being loved. We are loved only when the love of another is sovereignly and freely and desirously offered to us. Were it to be manipulated or compelled, it simply is no longer love. Jesus is offering to this woman no ordinary water. Jesus is offering a profound and abiding satisfaction and fulfillment, the kind that would meet her deepest need. How could she possibly know that Jesus was legitimate? What made his claim any more substantial than any of the many other claims of healing and wholeness that were being peddled in the marketplace of charlatans that so often is our world? Well, here's the thing. Jesus really saw her. You might even say he saw right through her. He prompts the woman in relation to her marital status, and she gives a part answer. But Jesus has done his homework. We don't know how he knew, but he knew. Jesus knew this woman more than she was willing to be known. She's thrown off balance a little as a consequence, and she attempts a diversion, talking about prophets and history and tradition and where one might worship and all this sort of stuff. Jesus, on the other hand, is not thrown off balance. He gently brings the conversation back to the things that matter, not looking for a past cultural connection, as the woman appeared to be, but offering a future-oriented spiritual connection. The thirst quencher that Jesus is offering is somehow connected to all this talk of spirit and truth. And here it's worth noticing that this life-giving water is not innate to the woman. She's not merely being invited to undertake a process of self-actualization or enlightenment. She's being invited to receive something she does not have on her own. If you knew the gift of God and who it is who says to you, "Give me a drink," you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. English teachers here will detect a number of conditional and subjunctive clauses there. I say that just for Leanne's sake, really, yeah. Basically, Jesus is saying, if you know what's good for you, ask me and I'll give you what you've been looking for your whole life. In other words, you don't have what you need, but I do, and I'm ready to give it to you, but I cannot force it on you. You need to want it for this to be appropriately meaningful. This water of life is not of our creation. It's not indigenous to our humanity. We are not born with it. It is not merely that we need to discover it somewhere within ourselves, like somebody sinking a well into the ground. No, it actually comes from beyond us. It is the gift of God, offered freely and only received when specifically desired. So it's not forced on us in any way. Which is to say, you can't accidentally receive it either. Wanting it, or having the thirst in the first place, is crucial as a prerequisite. I suspect this is where the long tradition of fasting during Lent or giving something up during Lent originally came from. By voluntarily withholding from ourselves something we would normally take for granted, we might experience some sense of desire, the thirst. Of course, there's an extra step of spiritual discipline required in this process, wherein we translate the desire for food or whatever it is that we might be giving up for Lent into the desire for God's kingdom. That bit's somewhat less intuitive, and unfortunately the exercise has little spiritual benefit without it. You might argue that there's some small inherent good in denying yourself in particular ways, but it's just as likely we end up with a toxic self-righteousness, which is so common amongst religious people, if we don't translate this into an acknowledged need and desire for God's kingdom. But should we get to the place where we realise our need and we desire what Jesus is offering, then he freely offers and we can freely receive. And this is a truly transformative moment. To recognise one's need and to desire what one requires from Jesus changes the way we do life. Rather than simply continuing on in our merry way, much like we were before we had this realisation and this desire was born within us and meeting Jesus, instead we decide to proceed the way that Jesus calls us. This new way of doing life brings a multitude of adjustments, none more vital than the ongoing and incremental development of altogether new desires within us. Rather than the momentary and empty kind of sugar rush of a spiritual high, we learn to desire more nourishing things. For example, more than needing constant reassurance and encouragement ourselves, we find a deeper joy in supporting others and spurring them on. Instead of seeking to be the centre of attention, we delight in lifting up other people. Better than escaping responsibility, as so many people seem keen on these days, we find strength and fulfilment in being responsible and offering genuine service to other people. The life that Jesus offers to us becomes a wellspring of life that bubbles up from within us and refreshes both us and others. Jesus goes on to speak of the worshippers the Father seeks. They are those who worship in spirit and in truth. What does that even mean? What is this spirit and truth business? The fact that we are creatures with bodies who inhabit a material world means it's inevitable that our worship finds expression in very material ways. We are sitting in a building, we've had tea and coffee, we've been singing songs. We make use of carefully curated repetition. Don't know if you've noticed this, but our services follow a pattern. It's true. Rituals guide us in a very particular way, and this is no silly thing. A well-crafted ritual, just as with a well-crafted prayer, can guide the heart to a helpful internal posture, the result of which is a meaningful encounter both with God and with other people as we encounter God. However, more important than the ritual or the craftsmanship of the prayer is how it is used, the manner in which we enter into it as worshippers. And here the ever-present danger is that we fall into merely putting ourselves through the ritual, going through the motions, but failing to enter into what we're doing at any meaningful depth. Jesus is saying the Father is not particularly interested in people going through the motions. It struck me that this is directly opposite to the authoritarian. For the authoritarian, performative obedience is somehow the more delicious for them than even having a true believer, because the authoritarian is not a true believer themselves. The authoritarian uses power over others to get what they want. When the authoritarian knows that one of their apparatchiks does not believe, and yet they fear the authoritarian nonetheless, so that they do what the authoritarian wants them to do, the authoritarian is even happier because he knows the apparatchik believes what the authoritarian believes, and that is that he should be feared above all else. Believe, don't believe, who cares, so long as you're too frightened to disobey. This is most certainly not what the Father is looking for in his worshippers. To the contrary, the Father is looking for worshippers whose hearts have been transformed by their encounter with divine saving grace. It is no issue whether they worship here or they worship there. God is not concerned if they do it in this style or that ritual. Hymns, choruses, meditation, high liturgical precision, low church Pentecostal mayhem, something in the middle like we do. None of those aspects of worship are what make the experience vital. Personally, I remain really grateful for the effort our musicians continue to make to constantly develop and hone and refine and improve their musical capacity. It enables them to lead us with confidence and make our worship experience the more delightful. Thank you, musicians. We are grateful. However, were you ever in the music team to act as though you were doing a concert to an audience, it would no longer be worship and it would fail to be what we need. And the subtleties of focus shift are significant. We humans know the importance of the intent of our heart. It matters what we are thirsty for. We are uniquely capable at focusing our energies to achieve our desired ends. However, we are the only species that actively hides from ourselves what we truly want. And this is precisely what God is most concerned about, which kind of makes sense to me, because where the heart is renewed, it transforms everything that flows forth from that heart. And the Father seeks worshippers with hearts renewed by the Holy Spirit, hearts transformed by the grace Jesus brings to us. Worshippers who put their trust and hope in a God who is love. Then we can worship in spirit and in truth. When Jesus offers living water that will bubble up within the believer, he is offering something that will effectively renew the heart. Rather than forever being caught up with our own interests in a way that will never be satisfied, the believer is drawn into something far more vital. We can become active in the kingdom that transforms us and transforms the world, from being lost in ourselves to being found in the eternal purposes of God. The miraculous beauty of this is that it not only brings life to the world as we bless those around us, it actually fulfills our deepest desires as we become the very instruments of bringing life into the world. Let that sink in. There really is no better way to live. It does well up within us like a river of living water, and it is to the glory of God. Amen.